Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday to join us this morning. This event series, as you can tell, is quite casual. It's supposed to be an inspiring session that is really just a caffeine-fueled 30 minutes where we can kind of talk over some interesting issues and come away feeling a little bit pumped to make the world a better place. So grab yourself a cuppa or a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever you choose. We've equipped all our speakers with their appropriately branded Good Loop mugs. And the theme of this morning's conversation is actually inspired by a Good Loop client. We have worked with General Mills a few times, but Nature Valley came to us really wanting to promote a new recycled plastic wrapper. They've got this lovely bit of creative that's all about turning wrappers into park benches. We worked with them and distributed their ads across these premium publisher networks, and we funded donations through to national parks across the US. So it's a campaign we're really proud of, but it also is a really interesting initiative because the plastic wrappers that Nature Valley use is an entirely unique technology that their team developed, but they are not patenting it. They have open sourced that innovation and they've made it accessible. In fact, they are actively encouraging their competitors to use their technology so that the whole snacks category can become recyclable. And so this got me thinking. I looked elsewhere and I found here in the UK, Nestle and Mars have actually formed a coalition. It's called the Coalition of Soft Plastics. And it does what it says on the tin, really. They lobby government and they fund research to get people recycling plastic wrappers. So these centuries-old sweet shop rivalries are paling in comparison to the Herculean task of plastics and plastic cleanup. And with me today, I have three speakers who each have their own inspiring examples of how we can share ideas, lift each other up, and come out of this crisis a little bit stronger. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenny to tell us more.
Thanks, Amy. So hi everyone, I'm Jenny. I'm the founder of 7 Stars Media Agency, and Amy's asked me just to chat about the theme of collaboration and specifically how it's helped us to work through the last year. So if I go back to when we set up 7 Stars, so we set up in 2005, and at the time we were literally 3 people. And when you're 3 people, you genuinely, you know, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's a lot of things you physically can't do. And we wanted to make a success of the business, and we could only do that. We realized before we even set up, to be honest, that we were going to need to find some great partners to be able to do that. And some of those early partners, as we got bigger, we developed more formal partnerships with, joint ventures, all of that type of thing. And some of them are kind of long-standing supporters and friends of the agency. But it was just in our DNA, really, to be collaborative, because when we started up, we had no choice. And as we grew up, we found we got a lot of pleasure out collaborating with people. And it's just in the spirit of our agencies to be collaborative. So, of course, when the pandemic hit, like a whole bunch of other independently owned businesses, we didn't have a head office telling us what to do. And there's good things about that and bad things about that. And I suppose the scary thing about that is, you know, you have to make all these decisions yourselves, and you have to get around this whole thing of, you know, how do people work from home? Do you remember this time last year we were sending around tips about how to work from home and how to take breaks and all this kind of thing, through to furlough. What the hell's furlough? Never heard of the word this time last year, let alone have to navigate through quite a complex scheme. Things like that. And these were like common challenges that all of the independent agencies were facing. So we started getting together as a group of indies, and that was independent agencies of all disciplines, so creative agencies, media agencies, digital agencies, etc., and just shared experiences, shared tips, and occasionally shared content. So if somebody had, you know, if one of the agencies had produced a great kind of mental health and well-being support pack for their agency, it was absolutely, that would be shared amongst all of the agencies, and those that wanted to could, you know, take tips and use that for their team. So it was all sorts of areas where, you know, collaboration's brilliant, and these are all issues that were facing the industry and facing us as an agency, but facing lots and lots of other indies at the same time. So all of that was great and massively beneficial. I would never underestimate the benefit of just sometimes even just talking to other people and realizing everyone else is facing the same problems and challenges that you are. And then from that came this campaign that you've hopefully seen that we call Land of Independence. And where that came from, and again, this was very much a media agency thing, was, we talked about how we were so, we found so many commonalities between Seven Stars and the other media agencies. And it was actually Andrew at Good Stuff kind of came up with the bright idea. We've got to talk a bit more. We've got to raise our head above the parapet a little bit more. And the thing about Land of Independence that we were trying to do is almost, remind the market or re-educate clients that, that independent agencies aren't that obscure. It's kind of, people talk about the big six and then everyone else. But if you look at it in a different way, you'd say, WPP is absolutely the market leader in the UK. The second most common choice of media agency is an independent, believe it or not, and then comes Omnicom and Publicis and all the rest of it. But we just thought we'd never really talked about that. We'd never talked collectively about the spirit of independence, the benefits of independence. So we came up with this, and we worked with the brilliant guys at Creature who came up with the creative and the messaging and the campaign that was then supported through the outdoor media channels and things like that. But it was all about Land of Independence. It was all about reappraisal of our sector, and it was all driven by the collaborative spirit that we had created through the pandemic.
I would never have thought the second choice after WPP is independence. That is such a great illustration of this, power in numbers. When you club together, you are the second biggest choice. That's a perfect illustration of what we're talking about here today. Naren, I'll hand over to you. It'd be great to hear a little bit about Media for All.
Yeah, thanks, and lovely to follow Jenny as well. Actually, I mean, I think our journey is slightly different. So we kind of started Media for All. I was at a NABS dinner, Stranger Than Summer Ball. Most of you have been to one of those. And I sat next to Karen Blackett, who everyone's heard about. She's been leading the diversity charge, for longer than any of us really. And I just kind of said to Karen, Karen, I think we're the only two non-white people in the room. Almost embarrassed to say that at the time. Anyway, she gave me this look of total disdain and said, don't you know any of the stats? And I've gone, God, no, fill me in. And, you can imagine how the rest of my dinner was. But the thing that struck me the most was the stat she gave me, which was London's 40% Black, Asian and other minority, and media was 12. And that's just the agencies, because nobody else keeps stats really. And I didn't believe her. And I remember getting home in normal drunken state at about 1 o'clock and turning on my computer and checking the stat and gone, shit, I've got to do something about it. So I kind of looked at my network of senior people in agencies and media owners, my competitors, my clients, and the people that you'd know, like Dino, who worked with Jenny at 7 Stars. There's Nishma Rob at Google, SJ at Grey, Bav at ITV, and Rack at Spotify. And I just called them all up and I said, guys, we need to do something about this. And I hosted a dinner. And I think there's two things that leads to collaboration for me. One is having a common purpose. And the second thing is you need to have courageous leadership, to kind of get there really. And we just talked about it and we said, we need to do something. And we started fairly small. We thought we'd just do speed mentoring, and we hooked up with NABS and Creative Access, Creative Equals, Brixton Finishing School. But I always remember the first event we had with NABS, and I was speaking to Diana Tickell, who runs NABS. I said, I want to do a speed mentoring event where all the mentors come from minority backgrounds. And she goes, oh God, Naren, how would that work? How do we advertise it? And I said, listen, it's open to all, but just let's make sure all the mentors, Black, Asian, or other ethnic minority, and we did it. And it was one of the biggest events in terms of mentoring that NABS had. I think we had 150 people, the energy in the room. And what people needed to know was there are people who look like me, who who have made it in the industry, really, and that was fabulous. And you know, kind of I used to run an outdoor business called PrimeSite, sold it to Global. Middle of 2019, I had a conversation with Global, and they said, "Listen, Naren, we love you, but we don't need you." So I left in April 2020, and over that time, I thought, right, what can I do with Media for All? You know, we're just 12 of us, and I started recruiting more mentors. The whole idea was I'd take the speed mentoring sort of format and go into businesses. Of course, we then had the pandemic, so I switched it to one-to-one mentoring. Started looking for mentors, mentees, and it all changed with the murder of George Floyd. You know, for me, that was the moment when there was this outpouring of anger in the industry, and we had a huge influx of mentors and mentees. You know, almost overnight, we went from 20 to 120 people. I've never met most of the people in MIFA. I've only met about 20 of them. The rest are all through Zoom calls and networking. But you know, it's now a powerhouse. We speak at industry events. There's a monthly webinar that Liam, who works with Jenny, hosts. It's on today at 4 o'clock if you go into the Media for All website. And we just talk openly about race, you know, in the workplace, making changes, demanding diversity. We speak at panels. We've got our mentoring program, which is starting in April. We've got over 110 mentees signed up. We've only got 105 mentors at the moment. So if there are people out there who are senior and from an ethnic background and want to help, you know, get onto the website and get in touch, really. But, you know, it's difficult. George Floyd showed us, well, one of the things, our members got pulled into a lot of D&I groups. You know, they're like, oh, you're from an ethnic minority. Can you go and run the D&I group? And that was incredibly difficult for a lot of our members. You know, some companies did it well, lots of training, lots of funding. Other ones just say, oh, go off and sort the problem. And, you know, the group's self-educating itself, and we're learning and developing ourselves. And the key thing is we're going to be a force for change in the industry. So that's the story.
What a story. It's really lovely to hear you talk about it and to hear your passion for it. I mean, it's lovely as well to see some commonality starting to thread through these stories, right? You talked about common purpose, and Jenny, you talked about common challenges, these shared experiences that unite people. James, I think this is a nice point to sort of bring you in, because obviously the IAB pulls together over 1,000 different members with all these different, probably 1,000 opinions. So yeah, it'd be great to hear how you guys approach collaboration.
Thanks, Amy. It's a brilliant segue, and I love Naren's description as Media for All as a powerhouse. I just love that. There's something about that which is really nice. Well, look, the IAB, if you weren't aware, we're the trade body for digital advertising in the UK. We have this, I guess you could say, somewhat lofty mission, given the history of digital advertising, which is that it's grown up really, really quick, and it's been this very short-term outlook on new players coming to the market and trying to make money as quickly as they can. And 3 years ago, we really changed the focus of what the IAB was about, and we had this new mission, which was about building a sustainable future for digital advertising. And our view was that it can't be short-term forever, because at some point that feels very, very unsustainable. And we try and go about that in a number of different ways. As Amy said, our membership base is huge. It's vast. There's so many different spectrums to it. I'm insanely jealous at times of the simplicity of perhaps Thinkbox's job or Newsworks or the AOP. They've got a smaller group of members, most of whom are totally aligned and want the same thing, coming back to what Jenny and Naren said about that kind of common goal. I can't pretend we always have that at the IB amongst our membership, because we just represent different parts of it: ad tech businesses, platforms, publishers, influencer marketing agencies, people that are in connected TV, in audio, search. You know, there's so many different bits of it. And I think if you know, at our worst, what we could do is kind of chase our tails and trying to please everyone. So what you need to do, and hopefully what we do is to take a slightly higher view of things and have a goal like trying to build something that's sustainable. And sustainable means loads of different stuff. It could be, you know, what trade bodies do best, which is around things like standards. Of course, that's important. It could be how we want the industry to be regulated. It might be the representation of people that we've got on our stages and our events, and write white papers and things like that. It could be about, and something we're really getting into is around the work that the AA are doing around the climate emergency and add net zero, because there isn't a very sustainable future if we don't get some of those fundamentals right. And I think, you know, in a way, we're kind of in the business of collaborating. We kind of wouldn't exist if we didn't. And we try and build this mission in a handful of ways. One is we always try and make the really complex stuff simple. And I think for a long time, it's been sort of fashionable to make complex things even more complex, because it feels like you're the specialist and you're the only one that knows about it. And we try and be an antidote to that. But the other thing we do, which is so prevalent to this conversation, is we try and bring people together to do things they can't do on their own. And I look around at our board, so our board's made up of 25 companies. So, you know, Google will sit opposite The Telegraph, who will sit opposite Quantcast, who will sit opposite Rack at Spotify. There is no other reason or room, virtual or physical, where these companies would come together and doff their caps slightly to do something for the greater good. And to build something that's going to last a long time, that's going to benefit us all. And it will come as no surprise that we fundamentally believe that a rising tide floats all boats. If we can get measurement in connected TV right, loads and loads of companies win, not just one. And if we can celebrate businesses who are being really transparent and doing the right things, then they all win again, not just one. The IAB is a not-for-profit as well, which does give us a slightly different optic. We don't come in with an agenda. Our only agenda is to try and make things better for our members. And being not-for-profit means that we don't need to make money from stuff. So we don't need to run events where people pay us to be on stage. We don't need to do outputs where people pay to feature in there. We can genuinely just do stuff that we think is better. And you know, this sustainable future thing is a bit lofty at times, because what you have is competitors, right? You know, their digital advertising, like any channel, can be pretty factional, pretty tribal at times. These are all companies that are out pitching against one another to try and get money to hit short-term targets or whatever it might be, because they need to survive. They've got to be commercially competitive, and that's been really tough in the last year. When they come to the IB, we ask them to do something different. We ask them to focus on this sort of slightly longer term thing. And credit to all of them that do it. But I just wanted to finish on, to pick up something that Naren and Jenny both said about, you know, sometimes barriers to collaboration are that people don't have that sort of shared goal or that shared ambition. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's easy to come around that. Sometimes a barrier is you kind of don't have anyone to mediate it. You've got this point of view and someone else has got this point of view. You might kind of want the same thing, but you don't want to give ground, or you feel like you can't agree, or it's difficult to work with it. And more often than not, that's the role that the IB plays, and kind of bring in different types of businesses, different types of people together, and we kind of negate all those differences because we don't come loaded with anything. And I guess the last thing I would say is, and maybe quite different to Jenny and Naren, who have got these incredible examples of collaboration, which we should rightly celebrate, is actually a lot of the collaboration that we do doesn't happen in the sort of the gaze of the public's eye, or get featured in some of the column inches of some of the trade publications. It's kind of quiet collaboration, not behind the scenes and behind closed doors and that kind of thing, but just collaboration that perhaps isn't the celebratory stuff, but just stuff that that helps make things better. And that's, I guess, what we try to be in the business of.
Thanks so much for sharing, James. Like you bring such a different perspective to this for several reasons that you've kind of outlined there. You know, both from being more of a mediator through to the fact that you are a not-for-profit. And some of those themes I'd like to pick up on in the last sort of 10 minutes or so. Would just sort of open it up for a bit more of a group conversation, I suppose, sort of reflecting on what we can learn from these three really different perspectives on this theme. And I might also just remind the audience, we're going to jump into Clubhouse at 10:30. We're going to finish the formal webinar, but we're going to jump into Clubhouse to have a more interactive Q&A, and also to collaborate with each other, see if we can help each other in any way, offer help or ask for help. So there's just a reminder for you. But I'm going to start with a question for the panel, which is, listening to you all, there's clearly a uniting thread of passion, right? And you all individually have really driven collaboration. And Naren, you know, I think I'm especially interested in the way that you not only have started Media for All, but you really put action behind your own words, right? Like you've already alluded to, you work with NABS, you're advisor to Creative Access, you're a mentor with Brixton Finishing School, you know, that sense that you personally dedicate time and energy to this. So you already mentioned this importance of leadership. I was wondering, God, I can't speak. I was wondering how important are the individuals in collaboration? How much is it about leadership and about individuals really putting a stake in this in the ground? And how much is it about organizations?
I think, you know, and I kind of mentioned this point around courageous leadership. And I think in order to, you know, collaborate with your competitors or even your clients and your customers, you've got to have, you know, courage to start and try something. And it's really interesting with me for Media for All, because I spent a lot of time last year just leading it, and this year I'm trying to make it more sustainable. So I've kind of created committees, and they're different people leading, you know, different work streams, and they're all stepping up. You know, I think this whole, you know, where people are sharing the burden, and, you know, the quality of the output so much better than what I was doing. So I just think it's around, you know, I think once you have that vision about what you're trying to do, and, you know, people buy into it, you know, you've got to kind of let everyone kind of go. I think the idea of profits are really important, you know, so because, you know, we've got competitors and clients all kind of working together, we don't charge for anything. So there's no charges for mentoring, there's no charges for speaking, kind of everything's free, and that's because everyone's volunteering, you know, and so that's created some interesting questions, you know. So companies have approached us and gone, listen, can you come in and do mentoring for us? Now that all of a sudden becomes, whoa, how do we do that? You know, because if I'm working at, you know, let's say I'm working at ITV and Channel 4 want me to come in, mentor their young talent, how is that going to work? So, you know, these are challenges we're dealing with now, but you know, there's some common stuff around when there's no money involved, actually collaboration in a way becomes a bit easier. You know, in Jenny's case, they're all fighting for stuff, like, you know, but it's different when you're trying to achieve something bigger, I think.
I like this idea of a courageous leader starting it, but then also being brave enough to let it go and let it be bigger than you. I think that's really interesting. That's a quite nice segue actually into a question I wanted to ask Jenny, which was around when there is money involved and when you're in a room with people that you've also been pitching against, you know, how do you break down those barriers? How do you decide how much to share, how much to hold back? You know, where do those barriers need to exist, and where does transparency really help?
I actually think, you know, it's a great question, but when you get to the nub of it, it's actually quite an easy thing to understand and to work out. And I think, you know, we, you know, similarly, you know, we're members of the IAB, the IPA, etc. So we're quite used to, you know, there are issues, things like climate change, things like D&I in the industry, things, you know, things like mental health that are so much bigger than any individual agency or any individual company within that. So I think there are all those issues, and they can't become competitive issues. You can't start saying, well, you know, our stats are better than their stats or whatever. That's just negates the end game, the goal of the whole, the whole what we're trying to achieve as an industry. So I think there's, it's a really easy decision to make. Is this an industry issue, or is this a 7 Stars or Bands for Cow issue in my case? So, and then therefore, the fact that you compete against these people in a new business pitch or something like that is completely irrelevant when you get into a subject like diversity or like climate change or something like that, because you just suddenly realize, hey guys, we're all in this together. And I think, just having an openness to the whole, seeing a bigger picture is the most important thing. So again, to your question about, is it about individuals, then is it about leadership, or is it about companies? It's actually about everyone collectively understanding there are issues that are far more important than who wins the next pitch. And if we can collaborate on those issues and still be competitive on the field when we have to be, it's just not a difficult criteria for me.
I guess the trouble is, so many of those bigger issues are also further away. And psychologists talk about this idea of delay discounting, right? I've got a BSc in psychology, so pleased to be finally using it. They talk about delay discounting, this idea that things that are further away mean less to us. If you say, do you want £1 now or £2 tomorrow? I'll take £1 now, please. Like, James, you talked about this a little bit, like getting your members to think long-term versus short-term. How can we bring the long-term benefits forward and help people see it, so that like we can achieve this thing that Jenny's describing?
It's tricky because we've all been brought up in this industry on, particularly with digital, this sort of short-termism that I talked about, and because that's how our objectives are set up, right? If I'm commercially minded, I have an objective to make this amount of money every single quarter. So yeah, I'm not thinking about, in 3 years' time, what does my business need to look like, and which of my competitors can I work with I'm not doing that. So it's hard to do it on an individual basis. It's slightly easier for us to do it because we are this point where all of these people come in. And to Jenny's point, whether it is mental health or it's regs or anything like that, there's a sort of a common thing around it. But the gold standard is probably the best example of where we've done it. So we created this idea of trying to make digital better. There's sort of 3 bits to it. All members can become part of it, and it's just sort of a glowing badge to advertisers saying, look, these companies are doing the right thing. And that took a lot of persuading different sizes of business that there's a long-term goal here rather than a short-term one. Actually, in the short term, it's going to cost you some money to do it, but again, credit, there's over 100 companies that are part of it now, and credit to them that have done it. And I hope 2 years down the line where we are now, they are starting to see rewards for it. There are some agencies who will only work with people who have gold standards. So, these things do pay off, but it's tough. It's really tough. Unless our objectives change, unless, as Naren said, unless leaders change and start to become more long-term focused, we will always just fall in maybe to these short-term traps.
Okay, I think it's probably about time to wrap up, but this has been, I could talk to you guys for ages. It's so great to hear all these different ways that you've overcome these challenges, because thinking about how do we make long-term issues short-term, how do we change objectives, they feel so difficult, but the reality is that all 3 of you illustrate it's possible. So I think we've learned a lot, right? We've talked about the way that we're stronger together and how we can emphasize that. We've talked about leadership and the role it plays versus the role that everyone plays, and bringing everyone in, and thinking about how we measure success and how we can bake in some of these big fish that we've got to fry, as well as short-term goals. Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll probably wrap up here. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've had a lovely chat over a cup of tea. As I mentioned, jump on over to Clubhouse if you want to have more of an interactive session. We'll be there for a few minutes just to see if we can help you, see if we can collaborate as a group. The link for the Clubhouse is in the email you received this morning. All that's left to say is to thank my amazing speakers, James, Jenny, Naren. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Amy.
Pleasure. Thanks, Amy.